Well, good day, colleagues, members of the European Parliament, staff, assistants, trainees, and people from other EU institutions, permanent representations, and members of the public. Today we're holding this hearing, a roadmap towards a single seat for the European Parliament and the countdown to the European elections, which will take place across Europe between the 22nd and 25th of May next year. So a year to go till the campaigns start proper, but our intention today is to introduce some new elements to this debate. We all know that the European Parliament is condemned by the EU governments to meet in two places. This costs an additional 180 million euros a year and some 19,000 additional tons of CO2. And that is particularly sad at a time when we heard last week from the IEA that carbon pollution has remained static for 20 years. And we're publishing today three new elements. The roadmap to a single seat, which was called for by three-quarters of members of the European Parliament last October, and it's a draft. It's addressed to the Council of the European Union, and we want a formal response by the end of the Irish presidency, the end of June. And I'm today inviting your comments as co-chair of Single Seat by the 22nd of May, that's to say a month from now, when the Single Seat Steering Group, whose members you will meet today, will adopt it. We're publishing the roadmap on our website today, singleseat.eu, and invite comments from the public across Europe. Can I also say that I'm chairing this meeting because my co-chair of Single Seat, another ALDE vice president, had a very serious car accident a few weeks ago and remains in hospital, although he is improving. And so obviously we look forward to his return as soon as possible. The second element we're introducing today is a statement to be included in the manifestos of the European political parties and the national parties in the European elections of 2014. It sets out the case for a single seat. As we know, and we'll hear from Ulrike Lunacek, the preparations are going on for these manifestos. And in some member states, I think in most member states, when people hear about the European Parliament, I'm afraid to say, they now think about inefficiency and waste. That is because of our multi-seat arrangement. And when I use the term multi-seat, I include in that the extraordinary obligation put upon us by governments that 50% of the European Parliament staff has to be based in Luxembourg. David Harley is a former Deputy Secretary General of the Parliament and had regularly to go to Luxembourg, inaccessible, so much so that the Irish presidency, yesterday and today, have broken the European Treaty by holding the first ever compendium council. The foreign affairs ministers, the European affairs ministers, the defense ministers, and others are all meeting in one single block yesterday and today in Luxembourg. It's the first time it's happened, but it's a very important strategic change by Council. Ministers are voting with their feet away from Luxembourg. What we're saying today is that if they can do it, we want to do it too. But in the end, the decision is with governments. And the third thing we're publishing today is the pledge towards a single seat, which we will ask all candidates standing in the elections next year to sign. But don't assume that the European elections in May next year are the start of a process. They are the end of a process. Because by the end of this year, the European Parliament's Constitutional Committee will have completed its work, very important work, groundbreaking work, on how the Parliament uses its new powers under the Lisbon Treaty to propose treaty change. And we'll hear later more about that from the co-rapporteurs, Ashley Fox and Gerard Hafner. This is the sort of issue which is of constitutional significance. The Federalists in the United States, in particular Hamilton, saw in the US Congress the capacity to make fundamental change. There are many people in Brussels today who see in this seat issue the elements of a groundbreaking constitutional change. I've used the term in an article published today in Public Service Europe of a supermajority. In October last year, 77% of MEPs voting on the EU's budget for 2013 proposed that government should address the issue of Parliament's seat. That is nothing less than Strasbourg. Now, I know there are people here from Strasbourg, and many of us adore the city, this fantastic place, but it is no longer fit for the European Parliament. And we'll hear other elements from contributors about that. So, for the time being, we're going to hear a little vox pop. What the people on the streets of Strasbourg and Brussels think about this issue. Don't take it too seriously. It's just a way of introducing the topic. Roll the video. Thank you, Veronica.
Idea to have two places of work, given the cost it incurs every month to travel?
I think it's a bad idea. It's inefficient. People traveling back and forth all the time. We're spending money on it.
Je pense que oui, c'est un déplacement inutile d'avoir deux sièges, surtout.
I think it's useless to have two seats, and I think these people should avoid coming to Strasbourg. It reflects a big cost for the state, and I think we should find a single seat indeed, but I won't make the decision. The institutions have to make this decision. Well, I think we lose money when we have to go to Strasbourg or Brussels and move every time. It represents a lot of money, and it could be more efficient to find another balance. I think the invoice is paid by the taxpayers, and we should find a solution that would be more efficient. Well, I think it's important for the city of Strasbourg. It is part of our city and of the life of our city. It is good for trade, it is good for restaurants, hotels. I think it's really positive that the European Parliament would stay in Strasbourg. Well, I think Brussels is the ideal city for this. I think they should stay there.
I think it would be much better and much more efficient if there was one place for the EU Parliament, and I think it should be here in Brussels with the European Commission and the Council and the European Council. It makes much more sense.
Moi, je trouvais ça plus intéressant.
I think it would be a lot more interesting to have two seats so that every country, every city would have a European building and a part of Europe within its walls in order to ensure unity.
It has symbolic value that you have representation both in Brussels and in Strasbourg in France. So I suppose you could argue that?
Je pense que ce n'est pas pratique parce
I think it's not helpful because it costs a lot of money and we are facing now a very big economic crisis. Well, if it's to save money, I do agree, but I live in Strasbourg, so I think for my city and for our European dimension, I would like all these institutions to stay in Strasbourg.
So what we did was we have two of the larger cities and we put our parliament right in the middle and made up a completely new city, which is also what Canada did, apparently.
So yes, this could be a solution for our problem.
Yeah, whatever is in the middle of Brussels and Strasbourg, whatever that may be, put it in there.
Okay, that means Luxembourg. Fantastic. Our other objective today is to get the public involved. And we're publishing our new pamphlet, which is addressed at the governments of the EU and trying to get the public engaged in this debate, as if they're not already. They are, after all, the taxpayers and the voters. And on our panel, we hear from later Edvard Kozuznik from the ECR group, who has made a fantastic video called 365 Seconds, 1 second per day, and he's cycling for a single seat. He's going around all the capitals of the EU, talking to the governments and making the case on the behalf of the people, who incidentally are not allowed to be consulted on this because the European Parliament says that they cannot conduct a Eurobarometer survey. They conduct a Eurobarometer survey every single subject under the sun, except the one that matters to the people, why the European Parliament is working in two places. So the message is get involved, and 1.27 million Europeans have already petitioned through the one-seat petition, which we've now taken over within single seat, for a single seat for the European Parliament, actually in Brussels. I'm now going to ask the next video to be rolled. This is Danny Cohn-Bendit, both French and German, a veteran Euro MP, a veteran activist. Don't underestimate Danny Cohn-Bendit. And then Erhard Busek, the former Vice-Chancellor of Austria, from the EPP family. Videos.
Is the wrong one. Is the wrong one. Because high fans of the single seat. I think the way you promulgate this single seat is the wrong one. Because you know that we know the treaty, and we know that with this treaty you need unanimity, but the single seat problematic, if you open the box, you will hold the debate on the seats. So I would say that the first debate that we have to fight for is to change one thing in the treaty, that the European Parliament can decide about his seat with a qualified majority of 3/5, or I don't know what, but that is a parliament can decide of this seat. And if we have this change, then you will have a chance to have a real debate of the single seat.
Strasbourg was playing an important role and is still playing an important role for the Council of Europe. But I think the responsibility towards the European taxpayer is even higher. And we have to look where we can save money and how we can use it for sure better. I think the time is over where we can say it's necessary for tourism and so on, because the costs of these decisions to have two seats are even higher, not only concerning the costs of moving all the secretariats and so on, and also the ecological side, but I think it is also losing a lot of time and lots of concentration. So far, it's an appeal to the French friends, because I'm quite sure they will find some other solutions here for Strasbourg. It is not a votum in favor of Brussels and against Strasbourg. It's a votum in favor of the European taxpayer and to make the organization of the European institutions even simpler and more understanding. So I'm asking everybody on this to take the right responsibility.
Well, thank you to the ALDE video team for those videos and to colleagues who've organised them. Can I just say, someone has left a purse outside. If it belongs to anybody in this room, please say who it was. Anybody? If not, we'll hand it to lost property. There was a Chinese meeting before, yes, indeed. We think it belongs to someone called Gianni Ermela. Okay. Right. Now, let's get started. Incidentally, the Council of Europe has been in Strasbourg since 1949, and a study published in the Dernière Nouvelle d'Alsace newspaper said that it contributes about 177 million euros a year to the city of Strasbourg. The same study said that the European Parliament only contributes 20 million. That's the difference. So, the first speaker I'm going to call on is David Harley. We're very grateful to David and his team at Burson Marsteller, a multinational communications firm, and their Brussels office here, headed by David Harley, provides us with communication support, which in a campaign which is about to begin is going to be of enormous value. We're grateful for all the work they've done. David.
Thank you very much, Edward, and thank you for the opportunity to be on the panel today to share some thoughts on an issue that has been around for a very, very long time. I hope you'll forgive me for saying that I was actually present at the Edinburgh Summit in 1992, and I don't claim all responsibility for that particular result. But if I can just dwell in Edinburgh for another minute or two, there was another interesting decision taken at Edinburgh in that time, and that was on the size of the European Parliament. And I'm referring to this because to make the point that contexts change. So there were two decisions at Edinburgh in 1992. There was a decision on the seat of the European Parliament, and then there was quite an interesting decision on the number of seats for each member state. 1992, 2 years after German reunification. There were 87 seats. By the way, this came out of a report from the Parliament by Mr. de Gucht, who was already battling away on this issue over 20 years ago. So the European Council in Edinburgh decided there should be 87 seats for France and also for the United Kingdom and for Italy, and 99 seats for Germany. And that was the first time that parity between France and Germany had been modified, shall we say. 2 years later, there was a meeting, a rather clandestine meeting in the VIP salon of Frankfurt Airport between the then President of the European Parliament, Egon Klepsch, and the then Mayor of Strasbourg, Catherine Trautmann. And this was in the week before Easter in 1994, and their agreement was reached on a new chamber for the European Parliament in Strasbourg. And that solved the problem that the Edinburgh decision on the number of seats had been ratified by that time by every member state except one. No prizes for guessing. The state was France. And when the good news came from Frankfurt on the go-ahead for the new chamber and the Louis Weiss building, the French Foreign Minister, Mr. Juppé, picked up the phone and said, gave instructions, we can now ratify. That was the context. It was a different Europe then. We were getting used to a reunited Germany. There was even a United Kingdom that was playing sincerely the role of honest broker. And there was France that was defending its legitimate interests as it should, and as it should still. And I would suggest respectfully but sincerely that we must recognize the legitimate interests of France, of Alsace, and of the city of Strasbourg. A frontal attack would be counterproductive. So the issue has been around for a long time. The seat was fixed in the treaty in a particular context. We have a different context today. And I believe that that context is above all one of a new disconnect between Parliament's increased political power and its rather eccentric logistical and housekeeping arrangements. And it may cost money. It may be bad for the environment. It may be tough on the MEPs in terms of their working conditions and indeed for officials. But I would submit that the main problem that needs to be looked at again is that the European Parliament has difficulty in carrying out its institutional responsibilities in this situation. So it's not just the European Parliament in isolation that is trying to solve a problem for the European Parliament. We have to widen the debate. The issue of the seat of Europe's Parliament concerns all the institutions and all the member states. And at the moment, I believe there is a real problem of impaired efficiency in institutional terms, and above all, a problem of the undermining of Parliament's credibility. And it's ironical, and I don't think it can be sustained indefinitely, that just at the time that the Parliament, in so many policy areas, by so many plenary decisions, for example, on the future financing, on the multilateral financial framework, the European Parliament made it clear to the member states that this Parliament cannot be pushed around any longer, politically. If the Parliament cannot be pushed around politically any longer, it kind of seems logical that it shouldn't be pushed around geographically either. So, to paraphrase John Maynard Keynes, when the context changes, opinions change too. It's time to have another look at this issue. It's time for change, but perhaps in deference to the President of the Convention, le changement dans la continuité. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And incidentally, the current Secretary General of the European Parliament, Klaus Welle, has published a document called European Parliament 2025, which very specifically says that the elephant in the room is the multi-seat arrangement, and the sooner that political leaders get to grips with this, the better. Our next speaker is Ulrike Lunacek, who is a Green from Austria. Ulrike, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Edward. And yes, I'd like to welcome everybody who has come here to debate that issue with us and hopefully also support us in our strive for getting a single seat for this Parliament here in Brussels. I'd like to start with a comment that Mr. Harley just said. You were talking about the disconnect, the distrust that we feel lots of citizens in this European Union have towards the institutions, least at all probably to the Parliament. But we're working at it that this trust gets less and less as long as we have this 2 seats or 3 seats arrangement, which simply for citizens is something totally not understandable. And I think our credibility is at stake. And I think the situation we have now in crisis times where people have been losing trust in the European institutions, in all of our member states, and sometimes even see the EU as something like a threat, which I don't share, but that is the image we have quite often. I think a step forward in doing away with the 3 seats would really be something that would also help our credibility. And it's not just the credibility, it's also, as has been said before, the efficiency. Those of us who have to travel to Strasbourg every month, not just the MEPs, yeah, but also lots of staff that have to go there, it's simply something no company would do that with their staff. Having them go 2 half days a month traveling somewhere else in trains that either do not have Wi-Fi at times like this, you would need that, or it doesn't work well in the chartered trains, on trains full of people who work on the same issues, so you can't really do phone calls that might be sensitive or that's some secretive, because everybody is listening. People all speak many languages, so you cannot even if your language is not one that many hear, you still cannot trust that they don't listen to you, they don't listen in and find out things. So our staff simply is blocked for 1 day a month from working, but they're paid for it. This is things that you cannot explain to anybody. So that is one thing. And the other thing is, and that has been said, and I think that's what we're here for and working for, we're going to have European elections next year, as everybody knows. And between the 22nd and the 25th of May, the date is set. And all the parties are going to have manifestos. We have European parties since 2004. I've been president of the Greens before I joined the European Parliament, of the European Greens, and that is the one issue that we are asking from all of the European political parties to take an issue in their manifesto that makes sure that they also defend the issue of going towards one seat, of implementing the roadmap that we're also presenting today, and trying to get an agreement with France. It's nothing of going against France. That's not the idea. And as has been said before, Strasbourg is a beautiful city. I'd love to have a meeting once a year in Strasbourg celebrating European peace between Germany and France, and what it means, for example, to all of Europe, to the Balkan region where I work a lot. Yeah? So this symbol is important, but not for everyday work. So the idea of putting the issue of having a single seat and a single seat in Brussels, to putting that into practice, one step towards that direction is to put it in our election manifestos. I'm part of the working group in my own political party, in the European Green Party, on the manifesto. We had our first meeting already last Friday, and we haven't decided on the topics yet, but it was presented, and I'm very sure we will have it in our manifesto, and I hope all the other groups will do the same, those who want it. Let me also go to another point that is important in that, the pledge of every parliamentarian who wants to be elected to say yes to a single seat, and also really getting in touch with our own governments, whether our party is a member of the government or not, and the embassies here, the representations here in Brussels, and we invited some of them are here with us, to really lobby our governments to start talking to France in a friendly way and tell them that this is not sustainable, not ecologically sustainable either. It has been said before, there was a study in 2007 done by some Green colleagues of mine which said that the traveling every month costs, sort of sheds an equivalent of 19,000 tons of CO2 every year. That is the same amount as 12,000 travels from London to New York and back every year. So that can be saved. Just talking about this simple thing of climate change and the problems we have. So to talk with the government of France in a friendly way, talk about the options there are and that it is possible to do something different. That is important. There are alternatives. I think that is an important message. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrike, very much. And now we turn to Phil Prendergast, who's a Labour member from Ireland and a former health professional. Phil.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for being late to the event. And I will just touch on some of the points that I'm sure have been made already. But I worked for many, many years as a healthcare professional in frontline services, and the nature of my work took me from day duty to night duty to antisocial hours to unsocial hours to Christmas Day, Christmas night, Christmas Eve, I won't expect anybody to cry any tears over that. But what I will say is that it's very well researched that working antisocial and unsocial hours is not particularly good for your health. I think it wouldn't take a genius to figure that out. But the points about losing time and losing valuable time travelling to and from an event, and from our particular country, and this is by no means a singular issue, where it takes 2 flights and possibly a train and a couple of hours drive before you even start to work, is simply not a productive use of anyone's time, I would believe. Now, I would also like to say that, you know, the option coming back, it has been also said that there's a difficulty about privacy and doing our business and conducting our business within the confines of an area that sometimes has, and has for the last 5 times, has had no Wi-Fi access on our Tallaght train, which is a difficulty in particular because I know a lot of people like to use that time to collate, to use it as a time for sending out press releases, for communicating and for reading up. And you know, I again, because I wasn't here for earlier speakers, and I don't want to labour too much on what may have been said already, but I want to say something about me as I would consider an ordinary citizen. I took this position 2 years ago to replace somebody that got elected to our national parliament. I had been in politics for almost 20 years. As a councillor, a county councillor and a senator in our own government. In that period of time, I would have considered that I was pretty well aware of what was involved in the European Parliament. And I knew about Luxembourg and I knew certainly about Brussels. And I used to hear about Strasbourg. But I actually didn't make a connection that there was a decanting of the entire lock, stock and barrel for 1 week in the month, for a part week. And it made no sense to me as a person, as a mother, as a politician, or as a taxpayer, why we should have this. And I very genuinely asked when I went to Strasbourg, why is everything so expensive in this week and not last week? And they laughed and they said, because we can. And I don't mean to disrespect the fact that this is a revenue exercise. I would agree with my colleagues who said that we do need to have serious chats. I certainly will be putting it in a manifesto, and I do think that perhaps we have an obligation and a duty to talk to our own governments about what is feasible and what is workable. And I certainly would concur that Strasbourg is a most beautiful city. And it's a beautiful city when you're leaving the Parliament at 10 past 10 or 10 past 11 at night and it's 22.5 degrees and you think, oh, isn't this just beautiful? And you're going in to go to bed to come back to work the next morning. And look, that's the nature of work. That's what we're there for. But as a system that could be hugely enhanced to have positive benefits on almost every aspect of our lives, and particularly the health side of it, I would say that it would make a huge amount of sense just to have one seat and to have that seat in Brussels. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. I had an email this morning from an interpreter in the European Parliament and a mother of 2 young children who wishes to avoid the travelling circus, and consequently also possibly a divorce, burnout and children going crazy. My own head of office, Lieke Biesemans, has 2 young children. They do not like her leaving for 4 days a month. And it's an issue which we should address. On the health question, it's not something that Single Seat has so far brought forward, but it is a fact. It is a fact that the environment in Strasbourg is already very challenged by the motorway network, by the intensity of traffic in the city, and the imposition of several thousand people just for 4 days a month means an additional risk for the people of Strasbourg, where in the elderly population, the hospitalizations for respiratory diseases is 3 times the level in Brussels. We now turn to Edvard Kozuznik, cycling for a single seat. Czech member of the ECR. Edvard, you have the floor.
Thank you, Edward. So my name is Edward, but it's not W, it's just V. Maybe many of people of this parliament knows me that I'm cyclist, but I'm not, really. I promised to my voters in 2009, 2008, if I'm elected, I go by bicycle from Prague, Czech Republic, to Strasbourg, to fighting the single seat. So I did it. It was 4 years ago. And And from that time, I started fighting. It was not the cycling. From that time, this 4 years, it was starting. And if you are asking what can just one member of European Parliament to do, it's mostly two things. To join a group of other colleagues, they have the same ideas. To join Ashley Fox, to Edward, Ulrike, and others, and to try to convince the governments. And the other things is to do in our own way and to ask really the Prime Minister and President. So in the last year, I did just 1 second video. Maybe somebody of you saw a really nice video from every day, from every life, from the member of European Parliament. So in the few weeks, I had already more than 75,000 views. So you can check it on the Twitter on Single Seat EU or mine. But it's not only in a nice video. You can see in the video the traveling between Strasbourg and Brussels, the family life and everything. But with this video, I start to travel in this February, and I'm promoting the single seat in every capital. I already did 11 or 12 capitals. I have been in Dublin, in Croatia, and in France, in Paris. I have been in Czech Republic, in Slovak Republic, Poland, Austria. And you can pick up some response of some prime minister. So I'm sending the letter, simple letter. Dear Prime Minister, France, or President of France, Chancellor of Germany, are you supporting the single seat? And I have already some responses. It's really interesting to read it. You can take the... If we are looking at the responses of every Prime Minister or President, they are almost everybody is agree, some way. Only one is against. Who? Monsieur le Président. The question is that the only reason that the office of President of France is telling us that for him it's impossible to change this treaty because the reconciliation between Germany and France, and because the symbolic, how say in English? Historic symbolism. Historic symbolism. So, okay, I understand partly. Look me, I'm not so young, okay? I was born in 71. But I still feel young generation. But for me, this symbolism is a past. For me, the bigger symbol for me personally, as a living more than 20 years in communist regime, is a year 90. For me, for example, and for the young generation of this part of the Europe. Just if we are talking like looking to map, if you are looking today's Europe, if you are looking the geography, if you are looking the center of Europe, you can put the finger on the center. And you will find Vienna, Prague, or city like this. So it's just joking. But generally speaking, I think we have to change. We have to change the treaties. We have to convince together as MEPs, together as citizens, our governments, to change the treaty to have just one seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Edvard. 71. I was born in August 1949, 3 days after Winston Churchill made a very famous speech in the Place Kléber in Strasbourg. And he began it by saying, "Prenez garde, je vais parler en français." But his message then was, yes, the reconciliation of France and Germany was the most fundamental step in the building of a new Europe. It was. We acknowledge that. But, as others have said, time moves on. And this meeting is sponsored by the ALDE group and financed by it, but this is a cross-party activity, and from now on, everything will be cross-party. But I would like to make one point. The liberal leaders of Europe, including 3 commissioners, Messrs. Kroes, De Gucht, and Olli Rehn, and Guy Verhofstadt, our group leader, and Mr. Werner Hoyer from Germany, Nick Clegg from the UK, Mark Rutte from Holland, all adopted the following statement in February. It's called European Reform. EU leaders and institutions should explore and set out priorities for EU-wide institutional reforms, including reviewing the effectiveness and cost efficiency of existing agencies and institutions, options to move to a single seat for the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers in Brussels. I hereby invite all other political groups, political families, European transnational parties to adopt that approach. If ALDE has given the lead, it's only because we sit in the middle of the Parliament and we're on the winning side in 90% of the votes. Now, the floor is open for 5 minutes, and then we'll move on. Who wants the floor? Incidentally, Lydia de Oedenberg was here but couldn't speak in the panel, but she sends her best regards. You have the floor.
I'm writing a letter on another matter. Well, I've been involved in this campaign for at least 20 years. My first question is about Cecilia Malmström's all-seat campaign. There was 1 million signatures. We delivered it to the Commission. The ball is in the Commission's court. And now I hear that the Parliament's Petitions Committee is going to do something about it. I don't know what, and I don't know what, more importantly, I do not know why. Because the ball is in the Commission's court. First point. Second question is, today, the Council is meeting in Luxembourg because the Council meets, according to treaty obligations, April, June and October in Luxembourg. This is sort of a bit of a side issue. However, as a European taxpayer, I don't see why they should. They should meet in Brussels because there are costs are going to be incurred, not necessarily extra costs for the ministers who go because, you know, one flight you go there, one flight you go there, blah, blah, blah. But it means functionaries have to go up and down the road, blah, blah, da, 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 da. So that is also an issue. It's a side issue to this issue, but I would like to put it on the list.
2 brief answers. I tabled parliamentary questions asking what the Council estimated the costs of its activities were and the Commission. In both cases, the reply was it's too expensive to provide you with an answer. The same is true.
They have to answer your question.
They've answered. They said it's too expensive to answer it. But this is the smoke and mirrors deployed by the administrations. However, on your first point, the 1.27 million signatures on the petition 1 seat is now being addressed by the European Parliament's Petitions Committee, and a report will be produced and will form part of the work being done by the Constitutional Committee on the issue of Article 48. So there will be a formal response, and that is thanks to President Schulz and Mrs. Mazzoni, the chairman of the committee, who both agreed that procedure. Next question. Anybody else? Please, Natalie Griesbeck.
Merci, chers collègues.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you for the invitation. In the ALDE group, we do not not all of us share this point of view. Well, this is a minority, I know, but I would like to share a few comments on this work that is being done. First of all, I'm totally in favor of this work on a single seat, and I was a bit concerned when Ms. Lunacek thanked us for the invitation to have a single seat in Brussels, but it does not appear on the invitation. As far as the idea of a single seat is concerned, I think that it's going to be quite difficult to have unanimity, but at least we know that many people are in favor of a single seat. Even if I speak French, I'm not only going to express myself on behalf of France, I'm going to express myself as a European citizen. I know that this has legal implications. As you've said, dear colleagues, we have facts, we have treaties, we have texts, and we have the jurisprudence that confirms the treaty. We know that we were all born in December 2012. Even Edward, we were all born when the European Court of Justice said that all treaties were to be respected. I think that the first thing that we have to do before discussing train issues, pollution, etc., we know that these facts can be discussed, but if we decide to have a single seat and to amend the treaties, we'll all have to travel. We won't have Wi-Fi on all trains, so we can ask ourselves if we want to live in a single city, because we come from all the regions of Europe. I think that the treaties are very clear. And the first thing that we have to do, instead of trying to make a fast decision, is to see how we can make sure that the European states decide to amend the treaty. It seems legitimate for the European Parliament, representing the European citizens. The European Parliament should be able to express itself on the seat, on the city where it wants to meet. So I think that the first thing that should be done is to amend the treaty. And if we want to do that, we need unanimity to be able to amend the treaty. You know that we can express ourselves in favor of this of the single seat, but this is the first rule that we have to follow. So this is a necessary step. With regards to political justifications, well, all these points can also be discussed. But first of all, if we have a change in this institution, and this is a fundamental institution, and we know that the European Parliament is meeting with lots of difficulties, especially because of the global crisis, well, the other institutions will also have to consider a move to a single seat. The Luxembourg Court of Justice, for instance, the Parliament part in Luxembourg, the European Central Bank. Many people talk about the European Central Bank. Well, in a nutshell, all the European institutions. And dear colleagues, if we want to have a single seat, a single workplace, if we choose it well, maybe it can give us more autonomy with regards to other European cities, and to maybe think of pollution and the things that we can do for the environment. I do not want to talk too much, but I think that it would be a good thing in this meeting to have other opinions. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you, Natalie, very much indeed. Natalie is a member of the European Parliament from Alsace. Her colleague... No, that's fine. She quite rightly represents the interests of Alsace, and indeed I understand the arguments she puts. Her colleague Sylvie Goulard... Ah non? Ah, excusez-moi. Ah, okay. Okay. Now, I was just going to say that not all French members of the ALDE group agree with that proposition, because Sylvie Goulard, in her book De la démocratie européenne, proposes to put a European university in the buildings in Strasbourg. Others propose a city of justice by moving the ICC, International Criminal Court, or the ECJ from Luxembourg to Strasbourg, or some other institution. So the propositions are all made on our website in the alternatives paper. I think we're going to have to close this part of the panel now. Thank you, Edvard. Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Ulrika. Thank you, Phil. And we're now going to be joined by other colleagues. And beforehand, we have video messages from Margot Wallström, UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence and a former Vice President of the European Commission, who is speaking in a bedroom. I have to tell you, it was in a hotel. And another Austrian, in this case a socialist, Kaspar Einem, former minister and now president of the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. Run the videos. I just explain the delay is because the European Parliament's own equipment does not work in these rooms. We've had to bring in my assistant Veronica's iMac in order to run the videos.
Dear participants and friends, thank you so much for giving me a voice in this important discussion. First of all, let's admit it. This was once a brilliant idea for historical and symbolical reasons to choose Strasbourg as the seat for a European Parliament. But time has moved on, and instead it has become the symbol for misuse of taxpayers' money, environmental problems, and practical reasons for changing the situation. It is very important to also think early on about the alternative use of the building and the infrastructure in Strasbourg. Turn that into something positive and looking to the future. And of course the idea of a university or an institute is great, and I hope that would be part of your deliberations. I hope that this will now start an important change in the situation. And I wish you all the best for your important debate. Thank you.
The European Parliament is not just a group of actors traveling around Europe. The European Parliament is perhaps the only really working parliament in Europe, and should have appropriate working conditions. Therefore, I'm strongly in favor of the one-seat initiative. To make this initiative a successful initiative, there still remains the need for something in exchange for France, and specifically for Strasbourg. That is something the European Parliament will have to think about, but nothing only the European Parliament can deliver.
Right. Now, the next panel, we're delighted to welcome Anna Maria Corazza-Bildt from the EPP, on my far right, then Gerhard Häfner, who is a Green from Germany, who is also co-rapporteur on the Constitutional Committee report on the seats of the institutions, jointly with Ashley Fox, who's on my right, who is a British member of the ECR group and who is the author of the calendar amendments which sought to move 2 Strasbourg weeks into 1, the subject of the court case that Nathalie Griesbeck referred to. And then on my far left is Jean Quatremer, a very well-known journalist, blogger, activist, and who writes for the French newspaper Libération. Dennis de Jong is a member of the GUE group in the European Parliament from the Netherlands, a member of the single-seat steering group. Ken Daly is a solicitor and a partner in the firm of Sidley Austin, who are the pro bono legal advisors to the single-seat steering group. We're incredibly grateful to Ken for his work and that of all his colleagues on the seat issue. And then Isabelle Durand is the Vice President of the European Parliament, a Green from Belgium. And we work very closely together on these subjects, and so we'll hear in a second from all of them. But finally, can I introduce Thomas Clough, who is a moderator for this session, so I'm going to shut up now. He is head of the Paris office and senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, and is a former journalist with FT Deutschland. Thomas, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm a former journalist for FT Deutschland who spent many happy years in Brussels, and it's a great privilege to be exercising full authority over this room for a little more than 20 minutes. Well, not quite, but there is a press conference starting at 2:30, so we have a number of very distinguished speakers, not an awful lot of time, and I would also ask those who would like to ask questions later in the Q&A to ask questions and keep any statement they might wish to make to a strict minimum of ideally 30 seconds. The topic we deal with is an exciting one. May I just say, to introduce it, that short of a revolution, a parliamentary putsch, a coup d'etat, which will be very exciting for journalists and think tankers and citizens, I don't see how this campaign can actually lead to an early success, not because of the lack of quality and dynamism and drive, but because for a French president to agree to give up on Strasbourg, even if Strasbourg gets something in compensation, is a major political price to pay. And my job is mostly located in Paris, and if I look at the well, if you look at the French opinion polls right now, to put it very plainly, and if I look at the state of the Hollande government, not quite 1 year after his election, I think it'll be very difficult for this president to pay such a political price, and I wouldn't expect that to change very fundamentally in the next 4 years. With that depressing note, I open the debate and hope to be vigorously contradicted by all the speakers. Et je vais maintenant le dire en français pour faire plaisir à
I will now talk in French so that Jean Quatremer will be happy. You have the floor, Mr. Fox. Thank you, Mr. President.
If that's all right. Now, Chairman, many different people have different reasons for supporting the single-seat campaign. Some, like myself, will do it primarily to save the taxpayer money. There'll be Greens in this room that are deeply concerned at the 20,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide emitted. There'll be others who are concerned of the right of the Parliament to decide where it sits. We'll each have different reasons for supporting this campaign, but my view is that we shouldn't go into those reasons in too much detail. We need to make common cause. We also need to realise that this debate has to be conducted in a respectful tone, because the French government has a veto. And at the end of this process, the French president will have to accede to it. Therefore, whilst my personal opinion is in favour of a single seat in Brussels, I believe our campaign, and indeed the tone of the report that I'm writing jointly with Gerald Hefner, will be that we're not going to mention whether the Parliament should sit in Brussels or Strasbourg, but simply that the Parliament should have one seat and the Parliament should decide where it is. And I believe that that provides this French president or a future French president with the political cover to make that decision. I appreciate that the French will want compensation. Strasbourg will want something in return. And we should set up a working group to examine the possibilities, whether that's a university, whether that's the movement of a court. I'm fairly open to those possibilities. At this stage, what I would suggest that members of this Parliament need to do is to concentrate on the principle that we should have one seat, and the principle that the Parliament should decide where it is. I happen to believe that Strasbourg is a beautiful city. It's much better than Brussels. Everyone should visit Strasbourg once, just not once a month, every month, at the taxpayer's expense. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. And I clearly underestimated the tactical wiliness of the single-seat campaign, having a two-step approach. Herr Häfner, das Wort ist bei Ihnen. Für eine kurze Zeit.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. President. Vielen Dank. Das Parlament hat sich ja mit dieser Frage schon mehrfach beschäftigt. Und ich glaube, man kann sagen... sorry. Yeah. No problem. Okay. Parliament has debated and voted several times about the seat issue, and I think there's a clear and growing majority that says we want to have one seat. For us, the question was, how can we proceed now? How can we overcome the legal and political obstacles? And I think there's one chance, but this is a very big one, and it's the one that Ashley already talked about. We should not talk about pro and con Brussels or Strasbourg, not talk about issues that can be seen differently by every member of this House. We should talk about the simple right of a parliament to take its own decisions, to organize its own work. And I mean, I appreciate history. No one should question history, but it's completely clear. The parliament that was described in the treaties 50 years ago was not this parliament, was completely different, was not elected directly by the citizens, was a very small assembly. We are talking about a huge parliament now that, since the Lisbon Treaty is in force, is co-legislator, which means we have trilogues. We have to negotiate all the time with Commission and the Council. So we have to decide on our calendar, on where we work, where we sit, and also on how we save taxpayers' money, as Ashley already said. So our proposal is to go for such a decision in Parliament by our report, where no colleague can say no, where all political groups must say yes, we want the Parliament to be given this right. It's a question whether we take ourselves serious, whether we see ourselves as a Parliament or as puppets in the hands of other institutions. So, and if we vote for that, the next step then would be to enter into negotiations with the Council. It will end up, I'm quite convinced, in a European Convention on this issue. We will need a convention for other issues too. But we will then negotiate also on questions of compensation and all that. But this should not be mixed up with the issue that we are talking about in the Constitutional Affairs Committee, that if the Parliament takes itself serious, then it must be given the right to decide on these issues, calendar, seat, self-organization. That's what we try.
Merci beaucoup, Gerald Häfner.
Thank you very much, Gerald Häfner. Now Ken Daly can take the floor.
I'd like to, as the legal advisor to the campaign, I'd just like to comment very briefly on just two legal issues which are relevant to these discussions. The first being, what is the significance or otherwise of the recent court judgment on the Parliament seat, and second, on the treaty change mechanism itself. On the first issue, as everyone here knows, the Parliament has already used its existing broad discretion to adjust the calendar a number of times. It does so regularly, and it recently used this discretion to arrange for a number of the sessions to be held back-to-back in Strasbourg in order to eliminate at least one trip. France, of course, argued to the ECJ that this did not respect the treaty obligations, and the court agreed. I wanted to emphasize, though, that this did not mean that the court weighed up the pros and cons of having a dual seat arrangement. It did not mean that the court measured the costs. It did not weigh the environmental impact. It did not discuss whether there is Wi-Fi available on the trains. It did not discuss issues related to Franco-German reconciliation. Rather, the court said simply that it didn't have a choice. Its job is to apply the treaty rules as they are written in the treaty. It had very little discretion. And indeed, the court very often finds itself heavily criticized if it overlays its own political judgment or appreciation on an issue instead of applying the black letter of the law. So the court said it best itself when it said, and I quote, "Even if the disadvantages and costs engendered by the plurality of the Parliament's places of work are acknowledged, it's not for the court to remedy that situation. Rather, it is for the member states to do so." So in other words, the court found that even if the majority of the Parliament, even if the majority of Europe's citizens disagree with the current arrangements, even if the cost is high, even if the public don't support travelling up and down to Strasbourg, nothing can be done until the treaty is adjusted. So this at least means that I think we can close one chapter in this debate, that is the chapter about whether the Parliament's own powers can be used to work with its rules of procedure to adjust calendars to try to find a more satisfactory arrangement. The court has now made clear that that chapter is closed and that in fact is not possible. The court emphasised that the way forward in this debate is towards treaty change, which leads me to my second point. A treaty change sounds difficult, it sounds complicated, but in fact, since the Lisbon Treaty came into effect, treaty changes is relatively straightforward. There are two mechanisms. There's an ordinary procedure and a simplified procedure. And in fact, those procedures have been used already 3 times since Lisbon to amend the treaty. They were used, for example, to adjust the number of MEPs. They were used to establish the European Stability Mechanism, and they were used for a third time to adopt the so-called Irish Protocol, and at the same time to allow for the accession of Croatia. So the mechanisms are there. They're already being used relatively regularly, and it's not difficult for them to be used again should the political will to do so exist. Now, crucially for this audience, there is also a new power created in Lisbon, which is in Article 48, which gives Parliament, for the first time, the ability to require Council to consider a treaty change proposition. And I think it would be quite in line with the Parliament's new, more muscular powers that we've just heard mentioned, that the Parliament consider using that power for the first time. And I know what you just heard from Mr. Fox, of course, is that the AFCO committee is considering a proposal to do just that. So I'll finish by emphasising that treaty change is the only way forward. It is not very difficult to do if the political will exists, and indeed the Parliament has the possibility to trigger that mechanism should it so wish. Thank
you. Thank you very much, Ken Daly, and it is now my special pleasure to use La Langue de Shakespeare to ask Jean Quatremer.
It's my pleasure to use the Shakespeare language.
Why on earth you no longer want to travel to Strasbourg when it's such a perfectly lovely city? I might mention as an interjection, I was participating in a debate with the mayor of Strasbourg, a public debate, so I can quote him about 10 days ago. And he said, well, of course, Brussels is to set norms, to do sort of the nitty-gritty. Strasbourg is the capital of Europe when it comes to the spiritual dimension, the great political dimension. I just throw this into the debate. Over to Jean.
Oui, je voudrais d'abord faire une
Well, I'd like first to give a warning. I speak the language of Molière in this English ocean. I would like to warn you because I participated to the first round table in Strasbourg a few months ago, and following this, I had to face a campaign on the internet where it was said that Sir Macmillan Scott paid me to participate into these events. So I would like to say that I'm there for free. I've paid my own bus tickets. I use my own car wires. So if people are tweeting, you can tweet that I'm here for free because I'm convinced of my opinion. And I can tell you that indeed, for all reasons that have been quoted by the different speakers, I do agree with the idea of a single seat for the European Parliament. And I do agree with the fact that the European Parliament should be able to decide about its own workplace. I think it's a basic condition for democracy, European democracy. So, beyond this, I'd like to talk about Brussels, because indeed Strasbourg is a very nice city, a beautiful city that invested a lot for the European Parliament. They built a tramway to the European Parliament, for instance, but Brussels is not making any effort. I've been living in Brussels for a while, and honestly, I don't think it is a European capital. Europe is not integrated in the Belgian capital. Europe is a part in a very difficult neighborhood, so I don't think it gives a good picture. When the television wants to shoot nice pictures, they go to Strasbourg and they go shoot their movies there because Brussels is cold, Brussels is terrifying, you just have to take Belliard Street. Oh, what a wonderful European architecture. You have a huge way for cars, huge pathways with a lot of electrical poles and boxes. That's the image of Brussels. So, public transportation. There is no public transportation leading to the European Parliament. If you live in Ixelles or Uccle, there are only 2 buses, 60 and 38, stopping to ride at 6 at night. And then you have to wait in the cold and the snow because no one wants to build new infrastructure for public transportation. So who is responsible for it? We don't know. But I think Brussels is a dreadful city. I have to tell you, you have to like garbage because you have to live with your garbage 4 days a week in Brussels. In Paris, Strasbourg, they pick up your garbage every day. So a single seat, okay, really nice. But the city, which is now hosting most of the European institutions, should also pay attention to the European population and make efforts. It's not only a disadvantage for Brussels, but also a real advantage for the city. So we should negotiate about the conditions of this work in Brussels. They should invest. They should build a tramway. They should build a subway. They should erase this huge urban speedway we see in Rue Belliard. Also improve the police presence around here. And not only for demonstrations. So yes, we can negotiate with Brussels so that the region of Brussels, capital city, or Belgium should make efforts so that Brussels would finally look like a European capital.
Bruxelles, ville horrible, ou Jean Quatremer.
Brussels, dreadful city, or Jean Quatremer. Isabelle Durand. Yes, I won't talk in Dutch now, but I will speak French in order to please Jean Quatremer. Jean Quatremer said some things that are right. Even if it's cruel, we have to recognize that Brussels is not making enough efforts. And I'm talking about the region, the federal level, and the municipalities. They don't make efforts to have a very nice city. But the subway is not so far. 500 meters, you have to walk a little, but it's not that far. So you cannot say that there is no public transportation. You're lying then. But I can recognize, of course, as a person living in Brussels, we fought here when the European Parliament was built because a lot of nice streets were destroyed and there was a lot of mobilization, even though we lost at the time. A lot of the big part of the neighborhood has been wasted. It's true that the Parliament building is a little cold, but there is also a very nice park, Parc Léopold. Even if it's managed by 4 different entities, 2 municipalities, 1 regional, 1 federal. I know it's crazy, and I recognize it. I also ask the Brussels authorities to have a more centralized vision of this common space and its management. It's not only a space for Europeans, but also for people living in Brussels. But the inhabitants of Brussels, they often don't know this neighborhood very much. They would like to be able to come here. We have worked a lot on this space here in front of the building. I won't talk about all the third parties, but we know we could improve it. But Brussels is really a nice city. You can ask the people living here, working here. It's a city that you have to discover little by little. And if you get out of the neighborhood, the European neighborhood, you will see that there is a lot to do in Brussels, and it's really nice to live here. Now, about the question of the single seat. Well, I think we should make progress, and I would like to tell the leaders of the campaign, I'm one of them, but I'm not alone, I can tell you that we are a little alone in this field. When you want to have a debate, you have 5 minutes to talk about this crucial question, because this office has to deal with all the questions, all the issues related to the Parliament. Every time we vote, there is a very large majority, but every time we ask the question at the political level, then everybody's running away. So they also talk about Luxembourg, and some people would prefer Strasbourg for some reasons, because of France, because it's a bigger country, because then it would be normal for France to have or not have this or that. I'm also surprised by the fact that there is a large majority in the European Parliament for a single seat, but politically seen, we are not able for now to make progress on this question. So I hope the report will help us to make progress, and I hope we will be able to ask this question in a very clear way, and I promise that Brussels will change its behavior in the coming years. Thank you, Isabelle Durand.
Thank you very much. We could have maybe water features and to have party days around. That would be a good idea. With colors. That's what happens on Thursdays here. Jean Calais.
Thank you very much for joining us. You're a member of the Fine Gael Party and EPP, and you embody the fact that this is you're part of the embodiment of the fact that this is a cross-party campaign and alliance. Over to you for 3 minutes, ideally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Embodiment, maybe not necessarily reflecting a majority view within my group, which is a majority in UPP as well. Well, good. Anyway, I hope it will become a bigger majority into the future. I think, as has been said, this is nothing against Strasbourg. In fact, Strasbourg is a beautiful city. It's a city that, as Ashley Fox said, everybody should visit, but maybe not 1 week every month. And perhaps for historical reasons, symbolical reasons, it made sense to have it as a seat of Parliament when the European Union was much smaller. But with an ever-expanding Europe, it's becoming less and less logical. And particularly, I think, the costs and the CO2 emissions. Just 180 million of taxpayers' money does not make sense every year when it could be spent elsewhere far more profitably. 19,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions, I find that difficult to comprehend when one of our 2020 targets is to reduce CO2 emissions by 20%. You've got to lead by example. We're doing the exact opposite. You just can't defend that. Even from a point of view of Strasbourg itself, apart from the prestige, we're only there 48 days, possibly 36 nights, worth 20 million to Strasbourg. That means the building is lying idle 317 days of the year. So again, that's hardly logical or sensible. Unfortunately, as the European Parliament has expanded, Strasbourg has become more inaccessible. There are less flights into Strasbourg than ever before. I know from my own country there were direct flights before. There are not now. It takes me about 13 hours to get to Strasbourg and 13 hours back. And for other MEPs from other member states, it's far longer. So again, that toll on human energy is not logical either. The other point which has been mentioned, excuse me, is probably the only city in the world where you pay double the price for accommodation Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday than you would for the weekend. That's not acceptable either. And even within Parliament itself, I've noticed that orange juice here in Brussels, I think, is about 160 a glass. Orange juice in the Parliament in Strasbourg, I think, is 360, and now it's gone up to 370 as far as I know. Again, no logic there. And when I said that one time in Parliament, a few MEPs who were in favour of Strasbourg shouted at me, Sean, excuse me, Sean, we will buy the orange juice for you. So it's not a question of the euro, it's a question, again, I think, of the principle involved. Another point, I think, which hasn't been mentioned is that the vast majority of, I would say, MEPs and officials who travel from Brussels to Strasbourg would probably have either rented accommodation or purchased accommodation with mortgages. So the week they go to Strasbourg, they're paying for their accommodation in Brussels, and then they have to pay for their accommodation in Strasbourg as well. And I think, again, that's probably unique to the European Parliament. So there are a lot of logical, practical reasons why it needs to change. At the same time, I would be in favour of ensuring that Strasbourg, because of its symbolism, and especially its history, and the necessity of ensuring that the building doesn't lie just idle if we leave, that some institution, perhaps university or something like that, would be given to Strasbourg. It has been mentioned that the Council of Europe, where they all fly into Brussels anyway, could fly just as easily into Strasbourg. That's another possibility. And even I wouldn't have any objection myself, again because of the history and the symbolism of the European Parliament maybe continuing to go there maybe 1 week every year. At the moment, we have to go 12 weeks. If they want to keep the history and the symbolism and so forth, I think that's something we should consider. Finally, I just want to say I'm a small bit dubious about the suggestion that we should ask candidates in the elections next year to sign a pledge. I'm not sure should members of the European Parliament be compelling other members or candidates to sign pledges, because I know from my point of view candidates are put under all sorts of pressure by a lot of groups, pressure groups, to sign pledges of dubious value and mightn't reflect, certainly not majority opinion. I think we should concentrate on conviction rather than coercion. I think the conviction has already been established. Where I'm concerned, it's really only a matter of time where logic will dictate and we will have one seat, and that's probably Brussels, even though, as has been said, it isn't the nicest city in the world. But then, when you're in here, does it really matter what's it like in the rest of Brussels? We're here most of the time anyway, from morning to night. So, I like to support this, and I will continue to support it, because, as I said, the arguments are logical for one seat. They're totally illogical and unfair to continue with the status quo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean Kelly. I hope you'll forgive me for saying that if the Mayor of London was still a journalist in Brussels, Jean and I remember that those days. He would probably be tweeting now that the European Parliament seeks to regulate the price of orange juice in Europe. So we are very lucky that Boris Johnson is where he is today.
Sure, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Edward for also bringing us here on board. It's not every day that GUE uses facilities made possible by ALDE, but I think this demonstrates the cross-party nature of this initiative. And I must say that it doesn't only hold for political views in the Parliament, but also whether you are in favor of, let's say, more federalist Europe or a less federalist Europe. Because at the moment, I mean, it's happened many, many times to me that when I tell people that I'm a member of the European Parliament, the first and only reaction really is, oh, so you are a member of the traveling circus. That's what people know about the European Parliament. So whether you're in favor of more Europe or against it, it doesn't really matter, because in both cases, you want to address this issue to get a better Europe altogether. And that's why I'm here. That's why I think you can count on certainly the majority in our group to support the initiative. I also want to say that the picture that people have, and it coincides a bit with what people said here about how beautiful Strasbourg is, that not only are we part of a traveling circus, but once we're in Strasbourg, we're also enjoying ourselves with dinners and parties and lovely things. And I invite everybody, although we are also always scarce of time, to go a bit further in Strasbourg and to look at the outskirts in Strasbourg. And then you see it's not only a beautiful city, it's also a very poor city in those areas. So if we make a plan, we have to take into account that what was said here about Brussels, that's also very much holds for Strasbourg. We see the enclave, we see the inner part of that town, and the European part of the town, but we don't see the rest of the population. And if we make a plan, we also should take that into account. On the roadmap, just 2 words, because I shall be brief. I think that I do not agree at all with the chair that there's reason for pessimism. Once we start being pessimist here in this group in particular, we will lose the battle. So I'm a pure optimist. But I think we can help our optimism by making some of our plans more concrete. I mean, there are a number of alternatives for Strasbourg. The City of European Justice, for example, would be a very good one. Once we have that idea, I think it could also be useful to have some type of a feasibility study of the implications of such a move and to see what the costs are, what the benefits are, so that our plans are not just words, but are also reports where we can show that there are clear benefits to what we think here. And I'll leave it at that, Chair, because we are running out of time, I think.
Thank you very much. And now the final word in this round is to Anna Maria Corazza-Bildt.
Joindre les francophones, c'est pas facile.
I'm going to speak French. It's not easy to be the last speaker. I totally share what has been said. We have to understand that we have a positive and very pragmatic group and force in favor of this initiative. And that is the message I wanted to deliver. Why do I take part to that campaign? Because that's what European citizens are asking for. We represent millions of European citizens. And if these millions of European citizens tell us that they do not understand why we do that, why we are spending so much money, we have the duty, the responsibility to let our governments know that the European citizens consider that this is not sustainable. We are we're not the only parliament in the world, and our governments have to do something. So I always tell European citizens that they have to keep supporting us, that we need to listen to what they have to say. say. We're not powerless. We can do something. The Lisbon Treaty gives us the possibility to ask our governments to amend the treaty. And what has been done in these last years shows that with the roadmap, etc., we know that we can make a difference. So, dear colleagues, please join us in this campaign. And to our governments, I would like to say, wake up, wake up. We're not going to give up. You have to take us seriously, because now we have a very concrete roadmap, a pragmatic roadmap, in which with which we invite you to a dialogue. That is an invitation to a dialogue with the different reports that have been published. We say that we all agree, that we are all in favor of that decision. We have a right to decide where we want to meet and with what agenda. So when some people say that this is taboo, that we cannot discuss that, I don't believe in that. And I would like to thank the MEPs who decided to express themselves very clearly on that issue, and to the other members of the Council, do take this issue seriously. Please join us in the dialogue. We have to listen to European citizens. The symbolism of Strasbourg, this symbolism is very important. It has to be taken seriously, and we have to give an answer to that. We have other ways of recognizing the importance of Strasbourg and the symbolism of Strasbourg. Well, we can also mention the Berlin Wall, the alternative in terms of employment, etc. We can analyze these different issues, and we'll have concrete solutions. But governments have to take us seriously, and we need to keep on discussing with governments. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à tous.
Thank you. We do not have much time left because there is a press conference at 2:30. Yes? The lady over there, just questions, not statements. And a second and a third question. You have the floor. This is not a question. I'm going to need a bit more than 30 seconds. I'm kind of a soldier in this, and I've been working on that this last 3 years. We've tried to do something. We've worked with Cecilia Di Alvaro. We discussed that in the Commission. We tried to discuss that in Parliament. We experienced the hijacking of that issue because they did not want to discuss that. So I know that we've had problems with our initiatives, and it's been hard to have an echo in the Parliament. And as I've said, my colleague, in a very good French, in an excellent French, I must say, we need to take that in consideration in the Council. I totally agree with what have been said. I'm not going to repeat it, but I think that from one meeting to another, we repeat the same things again and again. We know all these things. We know the initiatives. I think that we need to go ahead. The AFCO report is a new tool in our toolbox, and it is very important. As I've just said, we need to go ahead. We need a series of tools, and with the treaty, we can ask governments to please amend the treaty. But that is not much. I see that you're a bit afraid, and that's why I said it wouldn't be a question. I was thinking of what we could bring to this toolbox. I'm sorry, but this is a fight, and Jean Quatremer is, denunciating the, what's happening in the Council, and I think that he's going to agree with me. I totally support Ms. Wallström. She was the first to express herself against the DAXA Commission. We have many studies, many more members of the Council, and not only people from the Liberal Party. I think that maybe, Edward, in the next meeting, maybe we should try to make a difference from inside the Council and to invite all the chairmen of the different committees, the different member states and mixed committees, and from within the member states in Parliament, in the Senate, to try to have resolutions. And because these resolutions could support that idea, so that we could make a difference in the Council, not only in the Parliament, but also with elements coming from the Council, so that they cannot answer that this issue has to be analyzed and, you know, the usual stuff. So I think that we should consider that possibility for our next meeting. And thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you. That is a very interesting proposal. Yes.
Good morning. I'm coming from Italy, which is not a country which can be elected as a model for accountability. But I appreciate so much this campaign, and I hope short life to the campaigners. I mean, in the fact that quick success and short life, and in some years we are going not to discuss again about it. I think that the solution could be in finding also a French interest in the single seat. I hope this campaign will be the first example of European interest above the sum of 28 individual interests. For just a quick question, what is the position of the governments in Luxembourg and Belgium, which are the other two countries concerned by the seat matter? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping it brief. You can answer the question, can you not?
Well, very briefly, yes. The position of the French government has been made clear, but the position of the Belgian government is perhaps expressed best by Didier Reynders, who is the Belgian foreign minister. It's in the pamphlet, in fact. We'll publish it later on the website. We must argue for putting an end to the shuttle. It is clear that this relocation is very costly. And in the pamphlet, we also quote Radek Sikorski, the foreign minister of Poland. Having 3 seats of the European Parliament is absurd. Bjarne Corydon, the finance minister of Denmark, we don't see the relevance in having multiple headquarters for the European Parliament, etc., etc., etc. People are now beginning to express themselves. I take Madame Ries's point. We have to engage other people. But, dear colleagues, we have to start somewhere. This campaign has been running only for 2.5 years. During that time, we've seen a massive change in opinion within the European Parliament, so much so that the omerta that we first discovered 2.5 years ago has now ended. This is an open debate, and we are now engaging not just the public, but also the governments of the member states and their parliaments. We will be co-opting members of national parliaments onto the single-seat steering group. I'd like to thank our panelists very much for their contribution to this campaign. It is a pro-European campaign, a pro-democracy campaign, and one that we intend to win. And we intend to win it, to answer your question, very fast. We need to. Whether Brussels becomes Brussels DC, we don't know. I'd like to thank Thomas Clough for moderating this panel, to the panelists who contributed to this seminar hearing, to Sidley Austin, our pro bono legal advisors, to Burson Marstella, our communications specialists, pro bono, to the ALDE staff who've prepared this hearing, and to my own office and to those of other offices associated with our campaign, many, many thanks. And to the public who are on web stream, thank you for watching, and to all of you present, thank you for being here. Keep up the good fight.